Caldwell was a very rich and contemptuous man. He lived in a luxurious apartment in Century City and believed himself superior to everyone. He ran his businesses from on high, looking at ordinary people as if they were worthless. For him, only his luxury mattered in life. At 42, Caldwell still carried the weight of a shameful divorce. He had lost to his ex-wife, a famous and very beautiful actress, who was still talked about in magazines. Caldwell had lost a long lawsuit against his ex-wife. It had cost him a lot of money and, above all, it had destroyed his pride. Still wounded in his pride, Caldwell was full of frustration and resentment. He resented the whole world, especially the people he considered inferior. Their happiness, even simple, deeply annoyed him, because he, despite his wealth, could no longer be happy. This very morning, as he savored with ostentatious slowness an overpriced espresso, poured into the delicate porcelain of an antique cup, his piercing gaze was captivated by a scene unfolding 30 floors below, on the immaculate and glittering avenue of Century City. A food cart of the most modest appearance, whose peeling paint told the story of countless hastily served meals, displayed a faded and bleached sign announcing in uncertain calligraphy, Rico's Empanadas, $2. Rico Alvarez, a man in his 40s with a face weathered by the relentless Los Angeles sun, was busy behind his humble mobile stall, serving a small cohort of regulars with a radiant and contagious smile that seemed to defy the mineral coldness of the surrounding concrete. His calloused hands, silent witnesses to incessant and arduous labor, folded the dough with impressive dexterity, the fruit of daily and passionate practice. Beside him, Maria, his wife, exchanged lively and warm banter with the hungry customers, her clear and melodious laughter rising above the incessant hubbub of the street, blending harmoniously with the sporadic honking and the purring of the engines of the gleaming Teslas gliding nearby. Their children, Mateo and Sofia, two adorable blonde-haired children of about 7, were crouched on the sidewalk, absorbed in the ephemeral creation of their colorful chalk drawings, their crystal-clear laughter piercing the constant murmur of conversations and the roaring of the luxury cars that crossed their childhood world. Preston was literally stunned by this unexpected spectacle, a cold and biting incredulity tightening his usually impassive features. How could this man, a poor fellow who had had the audacity to be robbed a few years earlier and who was inevitably crumbling under the weight of accumulated debts, display such a bright and serene smile? This palpable happiness, visibly shared with Maria and their 2 young children, represented an insoluble enigma, a total and disconcerting aberration for a man like Caldwell, whose definition of happiness was measured exclusively in terms of financial assets and conquered market shares. He, who had just lost the love of a breathtakingly beautiful woman and suffered the public humiliation of a resounding trial, could not understand how a wretch could radiate a simple and authentic joy that he secretly envied, a joy that was now inaccessible to him. His deep and growing anger against Rico was in reality only a bitter projection of his own abysmal frustration, a painful reflection of his own inner emptiness and his inability to regain lost serenity. This simple mobile cart, this noisy and colorful manifestation of ordinary life flourishing in the midst of his cold and impersonal universe of glass and steel, was perceived by Preston as a direct and flagrant insult to his elitist world. Rico, with his flour-stained apron and his family radiating a simple and communicative joy, seemed to defy the entire edifice of the Caldwell fortune, a direct affront to his privileged status. In Preston's tortured mind, the poor were intrinsically weak and vulnerable beings, incapable of overcoming the trials that the slightest billionaire would crush with a simple, disdainful snap of his fingers. This mobile stand, planted like a tenacious weed in the very heart of his opulent fiefdom, was an intolerable provocation, an unsightly stain on the perfect picture of his wealth. He gripped his espresso cup tighter, the fine porcelain creaking slightly under the pressure of his fingers, a cold and calculating plan beginning to germinate in the dark recesses of his calculating mind. He would not be content with simply having Rico evicted through the city's administrative channels, a method too bland, too impersonal, and devoid of any personal satisfaction. No, he would break this man, he would extinguish that insolent smile that was unbearable to him, he would prove once and for all that the Caldwell money reigned supreme, dominating everything in its path, crushing any form of resistance or happiness that was not subject to him. Canceling with a brusque and authoritative gesture an important meeting with an influential banker, he put on his impeccable tailor-made jacket and headed with a determined step towards the exit of his luxurious apartment. The dry and distinctive click of his $10,000 pair of Loro Piana loafers on the cold, polished marble of the entrance hall resonated like a silent warning, a promise of misfortune to come. In the silent and padded elevator, his austere reflection in the cold steel returned the arrogant image of an inflexible billionaire, ready to crush an importunate insect that had dared to cross his path. Rico, with his inexplicable and disconcerting joy, would bitterly regret having dared to exist in the same space as Preston Caldwell. The street teemed with a vibrant and heterogeneous energy, a typical eclectic mix of the Los Angeles bustle. Wide-eyed tourists brandishing their latest smartphones to immortalize every picturesque moment, bold bicycle messengers weaving with disconcerting agility between the lanes of luxury cars, busy executives talking loudly into their invisible earpieces, absorbed in the incessant whirlwind of their professional lives. Rico's modest cart attracted a varied and disparate clientele, workers with dusty boots seeking a substantial and affordable lunch to regain strength, office workers on a quick break, their eyes glued to their watches, in search of a tasty bite to quell their pressing hunger, and even a few impeccably dressed lawyers, escaping for a moment from the glass towers to savor a homemade empanada. The intoxicating and appetizing smell of cumin and fried dough floated in the air, a simple but deeply comforting aroma that contrasted sharply with the sanitized and clinical atmosphere of the surrounding glass towers, where odors were filtered and standardized. Preston approached the cart, his imposing presence and his aura of natural power cleaving through the crowd like a ship cutting through waves. The few people clustered around the stand instinctively moved aside, sensing the eruption of a foreign and intimidating force into their daily routine. Rico looked up, wiping a drop of sweat from his sun-weathered forehead with the back of his calloused hand. "Empanada, senor? Beef, chicken, or vegetables?" he asked with a hospitable and sincere smile. The smile Preston returned was glacial and calculated, devoid of any human warmth or the slightest trace of kindness. "I don't eat from carts," he said in a loud and clear voice, loud enough to attract the attention of curious onlookers who were beginning to gather, intrigued by this unexpected confrontation. "That," he said, pointing at the cart with a disdainful gesture of his hand, his solid gold Rolex sparkling in the sun like a silent warning, "is a disgrace to this neighborhood." With a brusque and ostentatious movement, he slammed a thick wad of $100 bills, $10,000 in all, onto the rudimentary counter of the cart, knocking over in the process a plastic bottle filled with a glowing red-hot sauce whose vinegary scent spread through the air. The fragile plastic broke cleanly on the rough sidewalk, releasing a viscous and colorful flow that slowly trickled over the paving stones. "Take this and get out of my sight. The Caldwells do not tolerate the presence of subhumans like you in their neighborhood." A heavy and uncomfortable silence fell over the small, improvised scene. Mateo and Sofia, interrupted in their ephemeral and colorful chalk artwork, looked up, their innocent young faces etched with sudden and palpable worry. Maria placed a reassuring and protective hand on her husband's forearm, her gaze expressing a silent determination. Rico first stared at the crumpled wad of bills, then slowly raised his eyes to Preston, his gaze surprisingly devoid of any trace of fear or submission. "This cart, senor, is our whole life," he said in a calm but firm voice, each word spoken with unwavering dignity. "It feeds my family, it allows us to live with dignity, with honor. Your money does not buy our happiness, senor." Preston sneered, visibly troubled and disconcerted by this unexpected reaction, by this man he considered insignificant and who dared to stand up to him with a smile imbued with serenity. "You refuse $10,000. Incredulous and furious, he pulled another wad of bills from his inner pocket and threw it forcefully onto the hot cooking plate of the cart, where the grease was sizzling. $15,000 more began to brown under the intense heat, the acrid smoke rising into the air. $25,000. "Get out of here immediately, or I'll have your junk seized by the city. The Caldwells own this neighborhood, you hear? All this belongs to me." A murmur of indignation rippled through the small crowd of onlookers who were watching the scene with growing incredulity. A woman took out her cell phone and began filming the confrontation, capturing every moment of this display of raw power. Sofia instinctively squeezed her brother Mateo's hand, seeking silent comfort in this tense moment. Rico picked up the burning bills with deliberate slowness, ignoring the heat that seared his fingers, and calmly placed them on the rudimentary counter of his cart. "You think money buys everything, senor," he said, his soft but piercing voice resonating in the tense silence. "This cart is much more than just a food stand. It is my sacred promise to my children, never to be ashamed of who we are, of our honest work. You, a Caldwell, will never understand true joy, the kind that cannot be bought." Preston's jaw clenched violently with a deep and uncontrollable rage. This miserable man, who had nevertheless experienced the trauma of a violent robbery and the overwhelming weight of accumulated debts, dared to openly defy him, Preston Caldwell, whose name alone opened all doors. His bitter frustration, fueled by the humiliation of his divorce and the crushing defeat of his trial, exploded violently in the face of this peaceful and unwavering smile that he could not break. "I can annihilate you with a snap of my fingers," he spat, his voice laced with a barely veiled threat. Rico slowly walked around his cart, his small stature paradoxically imposing against Preston's athletic and intimidating build. "Annihilate me," he repeated with a hint of bitter irony in his voice, his eyes fixed on Caldwell's without flinching. "I have already been robbed, stripped of everything I owned, indebted up to my neck. And yet, I got back on my feet, I rebuilt my life stone by stone for Maria and our children. Your threats, Senor Caldwell, they can do nothing against the unwavering strength of our love and our unwavering determination." He gestured towards his family with a tender and protective movement. "Every empanada I sell is for them, for their dignity, for their future. You, with your billions, you are empty inside, consumed by your own bitterness." Rico's simple but powerful words struck Preston like an unexpected and brutal moral shock. He, the Caldwell heir, had always looked at the poor with condescending contempt, judging them unworthy of happiness and considering them useless parasites. His virulent hatred for Rico was in reality only a painful projection of his own deep unhappiness, of the corrosive bitterness left by his disastrous divorce and his lost trial. And yet, this man he considered a nobody possessed invaluable inner wealth, a simple and profound joy, rooted in family love, which he secretly and bitterly envied. The crowd, sensing the subtle shift in the situation, timidly began to applaud Rico, shouting scattered encouragements, "Leave them alone. He put you in your place, you rich guy." Preston faltered, the crumpled and burned bills clutched in his clenched hand. He had the power to destroy Rico's small business with a simple phone call, to reduce him to nothing financially. But for the first time in his privileged life, he hesitated, a shadow of doubt crossing his usually arrogant gaze. He took a step back, muttering in an unsure and hesitant voice, "Keep your cart, and your miserable existence." He turned abruptly and walked with a heavy and uncertain step towards his gleaming Bentley, parked nearby, feeling the weight of the crowd's accusatory and disapproving gazes following him like invisible blades, piercing him with shame. The Caldwell heir, the man who dominated Century City from his pedestal of wealth, felt strangely inferior, diminished by the simple dignity of a street vendor. That night, the cold and impersonal immensity of his sprawling Bel Air mansion, the vast expanses of polished and gleaming marble, the sparkling crystal chandeliers that cast icy shadows, the $20,000 bottles of vintage wine lined up in his climate-controlled cellar, seemed strangely empty, devoid of any human warmth or the slightest trace of comfort. Rico's simple but powerful words echoed in a haunting loop in his tormented mind, "You are empty." Preston, raised in the exclusive worship of the Caldwell fortune, had always believed that money was the universal key, capable of opening all doors and buying all happiness. But his recent brutal fall, the painful divorce from a woman whose spectacular beauty still haunted him, the public and humiliating loss of his resounding trial, had deeply cracked his ingrained certainties. Rico, this man poor by his standards, and yet so rich in his authentic family happiness, had shaken the foundations of his arrogant world. His initial anger against him was only a distorted reflection of his own abysmal frustration, of his growing inability to understand how a financially destitute man could radiate a joy that he had lost along the way. At the dawning of the following day, he returned to the bustling avenue of Century City, dressed in simple faded jeans and a discreet cashmere sweater, without a driver or the usual escort of his imposing bodyguards. Rico's cart was already in full swing, Rico serving his morning customers with the same kindness and warm attention, Maria laughing heartily while chatting with a regular customer, Matteo and Sofia absorbed in the creation of their colorful chalk drawings on the sidewalk, their childish laughter mingling joyfully with the morning hubbub. Preston approached timidly, a new and unusual vulnerability clearly visible on his usually impassive and arrogant face. "I was wrong," he said in an almost inaudible voice, the murmur almost lost in the street noise. "Your happiness, despite everything. I can't understand it. You, a man I despised for his poverty, you possess something that a Caldwell, with all his fortune, does not have. I resented your joy, because I deeply envy it. I lost my wife, considered one of the most beautiful women in the world, and I suffered a public trial that humiliated me beyond measure. I feel empty, and I don't understand why you don't." Rico handed him a still warm empanada, the golden crust exuding a comforting aroma. "Sit down, Senor Caldwell. Eat," he offered with disarming simplicity. Preston awkwardly settled onto a folding metal stool, the crispy crust of the empanada revealing simple but profound flavors that contrasted with the bland sophistication of his own cuisine. Rico sat down beside him, his dark eyes filled with a gentle curiosity. "Why did you come back?" he asked in a calm and composed voice. "You are happy," Preston murmured, his eyes fixed on the two children who were laughing as they chased each other on the sidewalk. I, a Caldwell, only have money. My wife left me, the whole world saw me lose. Your smile. I hated it because it cruelly reminded me of what I no longer have." Rico gestured broadly and inclusively towards the small crowd that was beginning to gather around his cart. "They don't just come for the food, senor. They come looking for a connection, an authentic human connection. That, all your billions will never be able to buy." Preston often returned to the cart in the following weeks, spending hours observing and listening to the customers' stories, a tired nurse saving penny by penny to realize a dream of distant travel, a nostalgic retiree emotionally recalling happy childhood memories, a tourist amazed by the simplicity and human warmth of this unlikely place in the midst of ostentatious luxury. Matteo and Sofia proudly showed him their imaginative drawings, colorful rockets launching towards unknown stars, joyful portraits of their united and smiling family. Rico told him about his difficult past with disarming honesty, the traumatic robbery that had left him destitute, the overwhelming weight of debts that had almost swallowed him, the slow and painful rebuilding of his life for Maria and his children, his driving force and reason for being. "This cart isn't just a business, Senor Caldwell," he explained one day with quiet conviction. "It's our dignity, our way of providing for ourselves with honor. It's not money that defines us, but our work and our love." This simple and profound lesson transformed Preston irreversibly. He, the billionaire heir who had always looked at the poor with condescending contempt, was finally beginning to understand that true wealth resided in sincere human connections, in the feeling of belonging to a warm community, in the unwavering ability to find joy and gratitude even in the midst of adversity. He became a new man. He began to volunteer discreetly at a local food bank, anonymously funded the construction of a modern community center in a disadvantaged neighborhood, and took under his protective wing talented young entrepreneurs from modest backgrounds, offering them opportunities he had always taken for granted, without ever seeking publicity or public recognition for his actions. One day, feeling deeply indebted to Rico and his family, he offered him a substantial fund to expand his thriving business, to open a real storefront restaurant, a dream Rico had long cherished. Rico refused the generous offer with unwavering kindness and a gentle smile. "My principles are this cart, my family by my side, the precious proximity to our loyal customers," he explained calmly, his eyes shining with sincerity. "We don't need your billions, Senor Caldwell. That's not what really matters to us." Preston respected this humble and dignified refusal, admiring more than ever Rico's integrity and profound humanity. He began to run Caldwell Ventures in a fundamentally different way, investing a significant portion of his colossal funds in innovative social projects and sustainable initiatives aimed at improving the lives of less privileged communities. With Rico, a silent and deep respect had developed, transcending their radically different social origins. One evening, while Sophia patiently taught him how to draw a clumsy palm tree on a corner of a paper napkin, her crystal-clear laughter vibrating in the warm twilight air, Preston looked up at Rico, who was watching them with a gentle and approving smile. "Why did you let me come back?" he asked, a sincere curiosity tinging his voice. Rico shrugged with a simple and disarming air. "You listened, Senor Caldwell. That's worth more than all your billions combined." Preston then understood a fundamental truth that all his fortune had obscured: the Caldwell money could build empires of glass and steel, symbols of power and wealth, but only sincere humility and authentic human connection could forge a truly rich life of meaning and lasting happiness. He had come to this bustling street corner with the arrogant contempt of a powerful man for a poor one, consumed by jealousy of his simple joy that he could neither understand nor buy. He left transformed, enriched by an invaluable truth that all his fortune,